primary objective of this call is to understand a bit more about what Neynar is doing for the Farcaster developer ecosystem, and also to sort of get to help other developers understand how they can get started in Farcaster, or how they can bring their application to the next level. Right, so I guess that's the theme, the objective of today's conversation. So I think let's start with a very simple question. That is, what is Neynar? What does it do? What does it enable developers to build?
Yeah, great question, and thanks for having me. So Neynar is a developer platform for Farcaster today. We provide hubs, APIs, index databases, easy ways to both read and write back to the protocol. And we do this for all kinds of data. So not only like the general identity profile, follow graph stuff, but also casts, reading, writing casts, reading, writing feeds, and generally helping people build products on top of the protocol. There's a bunch of developers today using us. You were talking about Wojtek earlier, who's building Supercast. I think that's going to be out in a bit. Previous products like, I think, Brian, you were building Tiles, right? And that I think also uses Neynar in some way. So generally, we are here to like help people build interesting experiences on top of the protocol.
Yep. So let's say I'm a developer, and then I subscribe to Neynar, and then I'll get a hub, right, a Farcaster hub. So then the question is, well, what can I do with the hub?
So you get not just a hub, but hub and API key to access all our APIs, and also access to our Postgres database if you need direct database access. So given all of these components, you can now pretty much build what you want in terms of building on top of the protocol. So some people choose to use the hub directly. I think RSS3 is one of the customers we were talking to yesterday who's using our hub directly to stream events. I think Flink uses our hub directly to some extent, and they, like Karthik or Slok, runs his own indexer to build Flink. And then with the APIs, you can read and write data. So I think Flink is a good example where he uses the hub to index and read his own data, but then he uses our write APIs because they're easier than writing to the hub directly and managing your own signers. And so with our API key, he has our managed signer service and has onboarded like thousands of users now since the protocol went permissionless. And that's part of our APIs. There's also developers who use direct access to our Postgres database to build applications on top. So Ghostlinks, for example, has been building something. I don't think he's announced yet, so I'll save that. But he's building something where he queries our database directly. And it's a hosted database, so you don't need to run your own replicator. And you can just query our database, get the data you need, and then he passes parts of that data back as input to our APIs to build the application layer on top. So essentially, if you're a developer, you can spend your time focusing on the product you're building instead of spending your time focusing on the infrastructure that is needed. And the primary reason it's helpful is that as the protocol goes through migrations and upgrades, there's dedicated time you need to put in to maintain this infrastructure. Like just recently, we went through a migration where the hubs were down or the replicators have issues. And we try to abstract all of this away from our customers, where the migration will happen and you won't necessarily know about it at all. And we'll keep the service up and running. We add a lot of resiliency to the infrastructure at our level, so the products can just keep functioning. I think Bountycaster, for example, recently wrote about how what they were building, they enjoyed building on top of our services because they didn't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure. So that's essentially what are some examples of what you can do. And I think we are continuously discovering new things that people end up building on top.
Absolutely. I was actually reading the API documents when I was preparing for this call, and I realized that you guys have added a bunch of new API endpoints, I guess, in the past couple of months, which made it a superset of the original Webcast API. Right, so it's not just what Webcast was offering earlier, for example, you can also get like the mints
Right.
from as a user, right? So maybe
Yeah.
talk about some of the things that only you can offer. They developers cannot get from Webcast API.
Yeah, great question. So, the way we think about it is that we want our developers to be able to both get the data they need from the protocol and then also insert data back into the protocol in the easiest ways possible. So getting the data that is needed, I think you brought up the mints example, which is a good example where what happens is, um, imagine you're displaying, like, I think Farcaster Fall right now, they don't use this, but one ways they could, like Farcaster Fall is currently like a series of open mints. And what you could do with that relevant mints API is that you can pass in a contract address of the minted, the NFT collection, and then you can pass in the wallet address or the custody address of the viewer or the user who's looking at the page. And then our API intelligently surfaces back relevant people in their network who they interact with who have minted said collection. And now instead of seeing like a static list of holders that is just a generic global list, they can see a relevant list and are more likely to mint because they know who in their network has already minted from that collection. Another example would be our like feed APIs, where we have a global trending feed API or a feed API per channel or per viewer, where you can pass in the FID for somebody and get the most relevant feed for them and display it in your app. And a bunch of our users do this today. Like Supercast is going to launch with something like this. Tiago built feeds earlier that uses this, and that has been helpful in building clients. On the other side, on the right side, what we have done is that ever since Farcaster went permissionless and identities went onto the Optimism chain, it now, unlike previously where you could just call the Warpcast API with a seed phrase, you now have to create a signer for your user. And that's an on-chain transaction. That's what today uses Warps in the Warpcast app, or you can pay like 99 cents. But there is an on-chain transaction you have to make in order to create a signer, which then the app developer has to store a mapping between the signer and the user and provide secure storage for that, and then can cast on behalf of the user or can react on behalf of the user. We try to abstract away some of this complexity where instead of managing your own secure storage and generating signers and all of that, we do all of that for you, and you can then use the signers to work on behalf of the user. There's obviously more work we have to do here, and Borodaj, for example, helpfully created a layer on top where he uses our service underneath, but now has an easier way for developers who are only creating one-off bots but not onboarding many users. They can now use his service to do this more easily. And I think that's a good example of work we still have to do, where in some ways we can make it easier still, particularly for developers wanting to do simple things in order to use our services better. And these are just some examples of what you can do with our API that weren't possible with the Warpcast APIs before.
Yeah, so let's dive into the sign example, because that's I guess that's a very important piece of building on Farcaster. Because the signer allows you to have a direct relationship with the user,
Right.
but it also adds a lot of complexity.
Yeah.
So to talk about how Neynar manages the signer on behalf of developers. So is it like you would store the signer of a user on your backend, and then multiple developers can get access to that if the user gives them permission, or how does it work?
Yeah, those are actually two different things. So we are building what you just mentioned. I'll speak to that in a second. It'll be out later next week. What we have now is, so we create secure signers on our backend using Amazon HSM. It stays on, like it's generated on our secure storage, stays on secure storage. There's no transport of those signers at any point. And what developers work with are these things called signer UUIDs, which are essentially identifiers for these signers. And the UUID corresponds to the actual signer, and we use that to make sure that the right developer is asking for access to the right signer that they help generate. And along with their API key, if there's a match between the UUID and the API key, we know, okay, the user gave access to the developer with this specific API key to this specific signer, and now we can let the developer write on behalf of the user to the protocol. This is what is available today. And the signers today are dedicated to every user and developer relationship. Meaning, for example, if Abura wanted to create a signer on my behalf, that signer would be dedicated to Abura, and it would not be shared with other developers. So the next time I wanted to onboard to another app like Supercast, Wojtek would have to create a new signer for me. So as a user, I would have to pay twice or n number of times, depending on however many apps I wanted to use. And developers would have to onboard the same user multiple times. Like each app would have to have their own onboarding process. There's some benefit to that, obviously, that as a developer, you now have full access to the user and you have a dedicated signer. There's also drawbacks to that your onboarding flow is more complicated. You're asking the user to spend money, and the user has to spend money every time they try something in the ecosystem. So what we are developing now is what is on the technology side, the concept of a shared signer. We haven't come up with a good name on the user side yet. We'll think about that. But what the concept of a shared signer does is that Neynar will create a signer for this user. And this signer, we will allow a specific OAuth access for every developer to that signer relationship. So instead of getting a one-to-one signer UUID, we can generate multiple OAuth identifiers where a developer will have to prove through OAuth that, hey, I am the right developer and I need write access to the protocol for this user. We'll check whether we have a signer for that user, and we'll give users ways to give permission for that signer to the developer without having to make an on-chain transaction every time. So you just make an on-chain transaction once to generate the signer, and then we can give granular permissions per developer to that signer, which both saves funds for the user and also makes developer onboarding easier, where you don't have to pay for every user you onboard. There's a universe where, for example, Neynar pays for all the signers we create, and developers don't have to pay the cost of onboarding users at all. It's just part of their Neynar subscription package. And that's something we are going to launch in alpha hopefully next week, and then have the full product out before the end of the year.
Yeah, I think that is a very exciting feature because it will dramatically reduce the onboarding costs for a lot of the apps. Obviously, now we have WAPs, which people can use to pay for signers, but WAPs have an insanely high inflation rate. So maybe tomorrow you're going to pay for 200 WAPs for just one signer. It's definitely beneficial to have a shared signer. But I do want to go back to the status quo for a second, because there's a part that I don't think I fully understand. So for the feature that you have today, let's say I'm a developer, I want to create a signer. I still need to redirect. I still need to jump to the Webcast app to go through that signer flow, or are you doing that for the developers as well?
So we give developers the specific Warpcast URL for that user when you use our service, and you have to either make a button available in your app that has that URL, or you can convert that URL to a QR code and show that, and then the user can use that QR code or the button to jump to Warpcast app and enable that signer. And that's kind of what is necessary today, because they need to have the only way for them to generate the signer is to use an application that has the seed phrase of their account, and that can have the on-chain transaction. Warpcast is obviously the default place to do that today. And they will, even in the world of shared signers, every user will at least have to do this once, where the first time, no matter what app that is, it could be a Neynar specific app, it could be some other app that a developer makes. If a user has no signers at all, they will have to create at least one signer. And they will have to sign that on-chain transaction either through a wallet. So Flink, for example, onboards directly with their wallets and there's no Warpcast connection, or through Warpcast if that's their default client. Once they have created one signer, then every other time moving from that time forward, they won't have to do it again. And we can just share access to that signer, but there's no getting away from having to create it once.
Yep. So now I understand. And you mentioned that the Neynar API will return a Webcast, I guess a link to the Webcast app.
Yeah.
and that specific link actually comes from the Webcast API, right? Because you still have to call the Neynar backend has to call the Webcast API to get that URL, and
It
then
kind of depends on how you've onboarded the user. So, for example, if you're Flink, which is built on our infra, there's no connection to Workcast. You just have to create a transaction with the custody address. And so the developer can now decide, hey, as a developer, do I think the custody address is on Workcast, in which case you'll get back a Workcast link? Or do you think the custody address is in a wallet, which in Flink's case, it is in a wallet. And then you can just prompt the transaction in the wallet window. So it will be a Workcast API call if you as a developer think that your users are on Workcast and you need it from Workcast. It doesn't have to be a Workcast API call.
100%, and that's why we are now at permissionless stage. You don't have
Right.
to, as Dan would like to say, there's zero reliance on Webcast, technically, I guess.
Yeah.
Then that will lead to my next question, which is the onboarding flow today so I'm talking about onboarding a new user to the Farcaster protocol. This onboarding flow today for a new app is really, really hard, because you effectively have to create a new wallet for the user, because obviously a Farcaster account is an Ethereum wallet.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's actually something that we are thinking about very actively at Abura, which is, today, if you log into Abura, you have to go through the Webcast signer flow, but obviously you want to open up to anyone. And then if we want to get them to the Farcaster protocol, then we will help them create the wallet, and then the recovery phrase and all of that will be involved. So to I guess for on the Neynar side, do you think you're going to offer anything that would abstract away the complexity there, onboard a new user to the protocol?
Yeah, great question. So you actually don't have to create a new wallet in this. You just have to have access to a wallet. Workcast chooses to have a net new wallet spin
Yeah.
up, or a wallet a whole new mnemonic spin up in their client. But Flink, for example, would just use the wallet you have on MetaMask, and you can use that address as your custody address. And what you need is an access to a wallet that has the mnemonic in it, so that you can create an on-chain transaction, because you'll need to pay for the FID and the storage. But you don't necessarily need that transaction to come from a net new wallet that was just spun up. And what we do today is we just let the developer prompt that transaction, and that's how Flink onboards users today. And you can prompt it either through Workcast, or you can prompt it through a wallet. In the future, to your point, there are definitely ways for us to make this even simpler, and try and create ways where developers building on top of Farcaster have just everything built in, and they don't have to prompt something somewhere else. It's going to be some time, in 2024. I don't think that's something we can get to this year, but it is something on our minds where we can make things even simpler.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a very important point, which is the wallet doesn't have to be new. You just need to have a wallet that you can use to do all the transactions. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yes, I guess in a Webcast design, they always say that they assume that the user has no knowledge of wallet, so that's why they put everything underneath. But then technically, you could just prompt the MetaMask on user's mobile device, and then complete the onboarding flow to register for FID, storage, all of that. I guess that makes a lot of sense. So switching gears a bit, so I want to talk about sort of developing on Farcaster in general. So not just related to Neynar. You have talked to a lot of developers, projects. I guess you're the one who probably has the most extensive knowledge of what developers are working on in the Farcaster ecosystem. So what do you say is the biggest pain point of developing on Farcaster today?
Good question. I think so the biggest pain point before, if we start from where we started, before Neynar existed in its current form, and you probably remember this when we were like a fully consumer product and we were trying to build an app. Um, and we had stood up all this infrastructure in-house, where we were running our own hubs, we were running our own replicators, we had read and write access. I guess Abura is still built similarly today. Um, and we were running all this infrastructure, and that was kind of like, it took up a lot of our time, and it was hard to run and maintain for just two people who were also building a consumer app on top. And then we launched an experiment that kind of externalized that infrastructure, and turns out there was some demand to like go use that infrastructure as a service. And we evolved Neynar into that company over the last few months. And so I think in some ways the hardest part still is just like getting started, where I think even though we have made that problem somewhat better, where you don't have to have a hub and you don't have to run your indexer, and you can depend on APIs that offer more than Warpcast APIs and aren't going away anytime soon. I think the hardest part is still getting started. We have a lot of work to make sure that getting started, especially for developers who want to build something simple, is as simple as possible. And Mara and I talk about this multiple times a week. And then on top of that, if you do want to go build something a little bit more robust, how do you find out what's the best way to like use the data as like at your disposal, or the tools at your disposal? And I don't think like Neynar, one, our name is not that easy to find. It's a weird name that we are stuck with. And it's not apparent, like evidently clear from the get-go, like, hey, here's how to go do something simple. And so I continue to believe at least that once people get started and stay at it for a little bit, they realize, oh, there's so much we can do. But getting started and understanding the protocol, like I think you and I come from a perspective where like we understand how the protocols work, and we have been working with hubs and replicators for a while, so things can seem very intuitive in some ways. But the truth is they're not. Like every day I talk to people who are like, oh, what is a parent URL? How do I set it? How does it appear in Warpcast? What is a channel? How can I use this primitive? Like, what do I do with FIP2, and how can I make it work for my use case? All of these things are not clear today. And there's a lot of work I think that needs to be done just to make life simpler for somebody who's just trying to understand what the world is about and how to go build something simple.
Yeah, have you thought about maybe creating something like a template? I remember Dutch back in the days. He had like a bot template that you can just use and maybe change a bit of code, and then you can make it your own. So have
Yeah.
you ever thought about maybe making a few templates available for users for developers to use?
Yeah, I mean, thought about is an understatement. We have been trying, like it's been on our backlog, and we've been trying to get to it for a while. Fortunately, it should be out next week. We just are putting some finishing touches on a template, and are about to launch some SDKs and a template with better documentation. And started, like, we already have a few apps out. We haven't actually done a good job on linking them well on our documentation page, but there are templates out there already that you can just fork to create your simple app that writes to the protocol, or simple app that reads from the protocol. And to your point, we are about to launch a template next week that will allow you to simply spin up a bot, and you can get started much easier. And we will add more templates on top of that. So yeah, definitely something top of our mind.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would say that even though I've been developing on top of Farcaster for a while now, sometimes if I have like a new idea, I want to see if I could, to try it out in a few hours. Chances are I will be thinking, okay, where should I get started? Is there a
Yeah.
place where I can just change a few lines of code and it probably will work?
Yeah.
Bot is a very good example
Yeah.
of this, because I think it's if you want to start from scratch, there are a lot of pieces you have to put together, and it's going to
Yeah.
take so much time. Even if you're familiar with the protocol,
Yeah.
not to mention those who are new to Farcaster. Um,
Yeah.
and the other thing that I want to talk about related to developing on Farcaster is, people need to have specific things that they can work on. I remember you in the past posted a blog post about like Farcaster ideas, right?
Right.
So that's also another, I guess, important pillar in terms of sort of getting more people to develop on Farcaster. So maybe talk about things in that direction. After you published the post, did people actually come to you and say, I implemented some of the ideas, or like how did that go?
Yeah, great question. Funny because Mana and I were just looking at the post yesterday, and we were surprised at how many of those ideas are actually being implemented in big and small ways. So if you just go to blog.neynar.com, that's the only post we have up there that we put out like a month or two ago. And in every, like we categorized it in a few different categories, and I feel like every category has had some development mostly using our infrastructure, that has been exciting to watch. Like I think we asked for like, hey, well, what if we could run an internal Slack or a Slack-like UI on top of channels that would make it more easy to coordinate, especially for communities that are onboarding and are more channel heavy. We have since had Farcord, which is not exactly Slack, it's like Discord, but it makes more sense than Slack, I guess, given people are community, like they're coming over from Discord, which has been cool. There's actually multiple channels now that allow permissionless channel browsing and user hubs underneath, like OpenCast is one of them. We thought about analytics, like quantified analytics for your profile. And Matthew Welter from the ecosystem really picked up that idea and ran with it. Like he built out this cool, like first funny project, which was like Hatecast, and you could see who people were, like who was unfollowing you. And then he converted that into a full-on analytics page that now has like a GitHub like graphic at the top to show how often a profile casts, if they're active or not, what are their recent casts, who has recently unfollowed them, and it's actually a pretty fun page. And it's been nice to like see him like take an idea we were brainstorming about and just like build a full-fledged thing out of that, which was pretty cool. There's a couple other things, like I think Tiago built CastHose, which is just it takes in a hub URL. It's open source. It takes in a hub URL and just provides a stream of data from that hub for somebody just simply looking to play with hubs and understand how data works out of that. I think there's more examples, but I think just to like elucidate the point, like people did actually pick up some of them, and I think it'll be cool if more people pick up ideas from that list, and we'll keep adding to that list. But we were already surprised by that in a matter of months, a fair number of those ideas had come alive.
Yeah, and I think one of the great advantage of using Neynar is that the developers will be able to brainstorm ideas with you, right?
Right.
And you obviously have seen a lot of the different projects, and then you can give them feedback, not just on a technical level, but also tell them what they can build, and then give them inspirations. So I think that's actually wonderful, and I'm sure that blog post has inspired a lot of people to build new things. Great work. Now I want to talk a bit about probably the future of Neynar. If you could maybe talk about the roadmap in the next, I don't know, 6 to 12 months. What are some of the things that you are most excited about? What are some of the features that you're going to add?
Yeah. On a very long-term horizon, we still have to figure things out, but there are a few things we're excited about over the next couple of months. I think shared signers is an important project that we've been focusing on. We saw there was some demand for it in the ecosystem where people wanted to stop, like even if there are warps, you have to like spend warps on every app, and if you wanted to sign into the same app on desktop and mobile, you have to now spend warps twice on the same app, and they kind of run out. So I think long story short, I think that we thought there was some demand for shared signers. We are excited to launch that next week. We've been building some SDKs that make calling our APIs a lot easier. So instead of having to like create every API call, like the API request, you can just call some functions within the SDK and just pass in the parameters. We're excited to launch that. Should be out in the next week or so. After that, like I think there's a few front end things that we want to enable, where right now we provide infrastructure only for the backend, where you get the data, but you have to render everything on your own. But there's like some simple pieces that are generic across clients, like how do you render a cast embed, or how do you connect to the Farcaster login and that connect modal. And these are simple things that are like similar across every app, but right now every developer has to build themselves. And it's like small things like showing a comment thread or something that it's not really necessary to put a lot of time into, and you can focus on what is the actual core value prop of your product. And we don't provide things like that today. So I think we'll start doing some things like that. Over the longer term horizon, I think we are both going to start looking at, are there interesting ways to mix and match protocols? So right now we are Farcaster only. And I think that has been good for us to like validate our core hypotheses and understand what kind of product to build. But there are like sometime in the next year, we likely explore whether or how we should cross-pollinate across protocols. And that's something we've been thinking about. And then longer term, that I think it gets a little bit more hand wavy, where we are talking to a bunch of developers and companies and understanding their needs. But I think we still have to figure out what concrete roadmap items emerge out of that.
Yeah, because thinking about the long term, I guess what's interesting about Neynar is that it has the potential to power all the social applications in crypto and obviously beyond, because Farcaster is where you guys started, but then as the ecosystem grows, and a lot of those apps are going to integrate with other protocols, I guess, and then probably it's also an opportunity for you guys to expand and then to provide other type of infrastructure and developer tooling. So I'm very excited for it.
Yeah. I mean, I think like roadmap items to your original question are slightly harder to call out a year in advance, but some things we generally believe in strongly and are excited for the future, which also gives us the motivation to build Neynar in its current form, is that we think that building a social experience into your product just generally deepens user engagement, no matter what the core value prop is. So if you look at like things in Web 2 where Spotify, their core value prop is streaming music, but they have a feed of what music your friends are listening to. Or being able to share playlists across your friends and having them add music to the playlist live. These kind of like multiplayer features, even in Web 2, have like clearly demonstrated deeper user engagement, which is why companies move in this direction after they land their core value prop. And we think the same thing is true in Web 3 because user psychology inherently doesn't change, even if the underlying technology changes. So as people build Web 3 products, we think they'll find that allowing people to engage with each other in some way in that product will allow for deeper user engagement and be better for both the users and the company. And that's the layer we are excited to power, and that's the layer we hope to power for pretty much every Web3 product that gets built. And that's why we think like that's the infrastructure we are providing with Neynar long term.
Yeah, and talk about your conviction in, I guess, Web3 social or general crypto based social networks. Why do you think Web3 social is going to succeed?
I think the fundamentals are the same for all of Web3/crypto/ whatever you want to call it, which is that there is something to be said about permissionless, ownership-oriented, distributed systems where you as a user own and have control over your actions and the content you create. And this is kind of like this tired story that people both in and out of Web3 have kind of tuned out of. I think generally, like they're like, oh, this ownership thing again. But I think like that is fundamentally true to all of crypto. Like the reason crypto works today and all of DeFi and now social is because people believe that they should have direct control over their data and their content and their assets. And the reason I believe in Web3 social is because I think the same mentality will apply to not just our financial assets, but pretty much all our assets, where individual creators, and as the creator economy rises, there will be many more of us. Individual creators will want direct control over what they create, especially the next generation. And crypto will be an obvious choice, or Web3 protocols will be an obvious choice. I also think that if you look at our current behaviors in Web 2, social actions we take online like dwarf, like 10 to 100x greater number of social actions than financial actions, simply because that's who we are as a species. Like, we are social beings, and that's who we are online. And so I think, like, as more of that behavior moves online, it will also move to a decentralized system, and social actions on chain or on decentralized protocols like Farcaster will over time dwarf the financial actions that humans take. Like, not accounting for bots and whatnot, but just like the actual specific manual actions people take. We will take more social actions than financial. And that, I think that belief also kind of strengthens our resolve in the kind of products we're building, and why we think the Web3 social will be something to look out for over the next 5 to 10 years.
I think that is a very, very well said explanation of why Web3 Social is going to succeed. And I love that. And then now I want to switch gears a bit again, and then talk about sort of your journey as a founder. I still remember the first version of Neynar, which was a pure consumer product, and it gives you a feed of NFTs, and then you guys pivoted to doing the developer focused things, providing hubs and API access. So maybe talk about your journey. Starting with, I guess, the time that you were at Coinbase, and then you started to work on the first version of Neynar, and then how it evolved over time.
Yeah, I mean, going from Coinbase to Neynar, when we first started, like, I think we started ideating in the winter of 2022, so close to a year ago, not exactly. But around that holiday season, and Mana and I were coming up on 4 years at the company, and we had been in crypto for a while, and we were just thinking about, hey, what are some things we want to build? And we had been watching Dan and Varun build Farcaster for the last 2 years. Like, we joined Farcaster sometime in early 2021. And we kind of liked what they were doing and the protocol they were building and the way they were building it. Like, I think product-led protocol development always resonated with us, even back when we were building at Coinbase, which is what Coinbase does with Base, by the way. So I think generally we've been fans of that strategy, and I was on the Base team back when. And so we have just been thinking about, like, hey, how can we build some interesting experiences in crypto, and then maybe start a company at some point. And it was back then still like an out there kind of thing. And we went through the idea maze, the consumer product you tried, which was more like a TikTok for on-chain media, was one of the many things we built. That one we actually persevered for longer than the others. But we had ideated like tens of different things, drawn Figma mockups, gotten user interviews and feedback. And all of them, outside of the TikTok one, the first few ones were just like, they didn't fully seem to capture both what we were trying to create and the problems we were looking to solve. When we chanced upon the TikTok one, and we started talking to people, people actually liked the concept when they started playing with it. There's a few other experiences that do that today, but back when we were doing it, I think we were among the only ones, especially in a mobile native, like fully fluid format. And we were obviously the only ones that had integrated with Farcaster. And I think we still are, I mean, that app isn't alive anymore, but I think we still are the only client native store, like Farcaster wallet kind of product. And we had some fun building that. And as we were building that, the pivot from there to where we are now was more a matter of experimentation, discovery, and chance, where we didn't actually stay up thinking and whiteboarding like, hey, how do we pivot out of this consumer product? We were building it full time, and we had raised money for it. And all our investors who actually invested in our pre-seed round, they had invested in that product, and they've been very nice to work with us as we go through this pivot. But they hadn't invested in an infra product. And just as a matter of experiment, we opened up that web page back when it was called hubs.neynar.com, saying, hey, if you want a hub, we have it, and you can pay for it and get access to it, and it'll be a third of the cost. and you can run it instantly instead of trying to spend hours trying to stand it up. And people started paying for it immediately. Like when we launched that webpage, we thought only Varun would pay for it because we were like, oh, Varun's going to think this is an interesting experiment. He's going to sign up just to like test it, which was true, by the way. He did sign up. But we didn't expect anybody else to pay for it. And multiple people paid for it like within a few hours. And we were like, oh shit, like something is happening here. Also, wait, somebody, yes is saying that he can't hear us. Yeah, oh, he left already.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I think we're good.
Yeah, so and we hadn't even fully, like, when we launched that webpage, we hadn't built out a way to externalize our hubs. It was a true experiment. We didn't even know how to do it. And once people paid for it, we stayed up that night where we were like, hey guys, thanks for paying. Just getting it to you shortly. Hold on. And then we stayed up that night trying to do that, and we did it in a few hours, and we gave them managed hubs. And since then, it's kind of like, it's been public the way it's evolved, and people got hubs first, and then we were like, oh, okay, seems like Warpcast is going to deprecate its APIs. Maybe we can build better APIs. And then we like built out those APIs, and turns out people wanted them too. And then we were like, oh, maybe people want data access to a hosted replicator. And so we built that out, and we also made it available on Dune in case you wanted to connect the data with on-chain activity. And turns out people wanted that too. And so we kind of have just been like seeing what people benefit from and building it out and adding it to our services. And we just keep adding it to the same subscription package. So, we don't do anything complicated like AWS yet, where you are measured and charged by every usage. We just have like standard flat pricing, and everything's just added in there. So anytime we build something new, we just add it to your package and you keep using it. And we have just been trying to figure out, like, is this useful? Like, are we adding value? And so far it looks like, at least to the population we are catering to, we are adding some value. And that's been exciting for us. And we like chanced upon shared signers the same way. Like, we talked about the concept way before Warpcast actually started, or Farcaster started doing this on chain. And we were like, oh, that'd be interesting at some point. Like, people wouldn't want to pay. And we were like, okay, we'll see when somebody asks for it. And you, like Bill, you were among the people who asked for it. And there's like, we have a couple of casts pinned on our product document for shared signers, and yours is one of them. And we were like, okay, people are asking for it now. Let's try building it. And so that's what we are building now. We'll make it available next week. But yeah, our journey on the infrastructure side has been very much like just see what people want and how can we solve them and add value.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this is a great story to find PMF, because if you look at the response from Farcaster developers today, or Neynar has a very clear PMF, which is to give them developer tools and APIs and hubs, and then it also helps them sort of ideate and then helps them build their product. So I think that this is a great Farcaster builder story, and I really hope that more people will hear the story, and then they will either jump into the ecosystem to develop something new, or maybe they will also think about it as providing infrastructure for other Farcaster developers. So I guess we are going towards the end of the conversation. But I want to give you a chance to highlight if there's any call to action that you want to highlight. If someone is listening to this call today and they want to use Neynar, how should they get started?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, I think the main call to action is if you want to build on Farcaster, then just reach out and we will help you build. Like, if you want to ideate, if you want to just jam on product ideas, stop by our office. Our office is an open space for everybody in the ecosystem, and we'll help you jam. And more specifically, like, we have purple credits. We are happy to like set you up with some so you can get started for free and start building services on top of Farcaster very easily. But even before, like, regardless of whether you are a subscriber or actually want to subscribe or any of that, we're just here to help. And we like hearing product ideas, and we like it even more when we gem with others and they run with product ideas and actually build something cool. So yeah, we're just happy to like work with you on that.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed, seeing you guys sort of grow from a consumer product to now a developer-facing platform, and seeing so many Farcaster projects built on top of Neynar. So it is really, really fantastic to also see that you guys help other developers build their projects. So yeah, I think. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I really enjoyed it. And I hope that we'll get to catch up in person soon, probably next year at East Denver, or at some other, maybe Farcon.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
any last words that you want to share before we wrap up?
No, no, thank you for
Yeah,
having me and thank you for doing this. And this is really fun, and also enjoying what you're doing with the Bura. And yeah, reach out, as I said, and we are here to work with you all.
absolutely. All right.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Uh,
Will.
a nice weekend.
Yeah, you too. Bye.